Welcome back to the deep dive. We are opening up a file today that honestly feels a little heavier in my hands than usual.
Mm.
It's a biography, but it's not the kind of biography you read to feel inspired about your morning routine or, your leadership style.
Yeah,
It's the kind you read as a warning.
it really is. It's a story that functions like a massive, flashing red light on the dashboard of the spiritual life. We are looking at the life of Lot.
Right, Lot, the nephew of Abraham. And usually when I think of Lot, I have this very specific, somewhat chaotic imagery in my head.
I think we all do.
I think of fleeing a burning city. I think of a pillar of salt.
Yeah.
It feels like a tragedy from start to finish.
It is a tragedy. In many ways, it is the ultimate tragedy of the Old Testament believer. But, and this is where we have to start, it's also a story of confusing, paradoxical grace.
How so?
Because if you just read the book of Genesis, Lot looks like a total failure. I mean, his life reads like a roadmap of compromise and loss.
Exactly. He loses his home, his wife, his integrity seems to be in tatters, and he ends up living in a cave. It's a complete downward spiral.
A total collapse.
But then you flip over to the New Testament, specifically to Peter, and you get absolute whiplash.
You do. It's startling. It really is.
Because Peter calls him a righteous man.
3 times. Not once, but 3 times. Righteous Lot, that righteous man. And it says the daily lawlessness he saw tormented his righteous soul.
So that is the tension we are stepping into today. It's the whole reason for this deep dive. How do we reconcile the absolute mess of Lot's life in Genesis with the title righteous in the New Testament?
It feels almost like a contradiction.
It does.
Yeah.
Feels like two different people.
And that is the framing question for us. Our goal here, the mission of this deep dive, is to use Lot as a case study, a timeless case study for the thoughtful Christian.
And we should say we aren't here to mock him.
Oh, absolutely not. We are here to see ourselves in him. This is a study on the friction, the dangerous friction, between having a righteous standing before God and living a worldly lifestyle.
It's the difference between being safe and being sound, in a way.
That's good.
Or perhaps the difference between surviving a fire and building a life that can actually withstand the heat.
Precisely. The source material we are working through today, a really profound essay titled The Righteous Fugitive, points out this central warning, the spiritual danger of prioritizing worldly prosperity over divine fellowship.
Say that again.
The spiritual danger of prioritizing worldly prosperity over divine fellowship. That is the heartbeat of Lot's failure.
And the contrast the essay draws between him and Abraham is so sharp, so clear. It says, Abraham looked for a city built by God, but Lot pitched his tent toward a city of destruction.
Wow.
That one line just frames the entire story.
It really does, and that's the trajectory we're going to trace. From walking side by side with the father of faith to escaping through the flames with nothing but the clothes on his back.
So let's get our bearings. Before we get to the fire and brimstone, we need to understand the world Lot was living in.
Yes, the context is everything.
Because I think we have a cartoon image of this in our heads. We imagine Lot looking out at Sodom and seeing a dark, scary, obviously evil place, like Mordor or something.
Right, like a smoking volcano with demons flying around.
But the essay points out that is not what Lot saw at all.
No, not even close. To understand the temptation, you have to understand the geography. We need to look at the kikkar.
The kikkar. Okay, break that down for us, because that term comes up in the Hebrew text, but we usually just gloss over it as the plain.
Right. And the plain sounds boring. It sounds flight. Kikkar literally means a circle or a disc.
Okay.
In the Bible, it refers specifically to the circular plain of the Jordan Valley, just north of the Dead Sea. Now, today, if you go to that region, it's arid, it's dry, it looks like a wilderness.
I've seen pictures. It's not exactly inviting.
Not at all.
But-
But the Bible gives us a snapshot of the Middle Bronze Age that is radically different. The text stops to give us a flashback, essentially.
It wants us to see what Lot saw.
Exactly. Genesis 13:10 tells us that before the destruction, it was well-watered everywhere,
Yeah.
like the garden of the Lord, like the land of Egypt.
Like the garden of the Lord. That is high praise. That's Eden language.
It is. It's intentional. The writer is telling us that this place looked like paradise restored. It was lush. It was green. It was an agricultural gold mine.
This wasn't a wasteland. This was prime real estate.
It was the best real estate in the entire region. You have to remember, Lot was a man with flocks and herds. He was a businessman, in a sense.
A livestock CEO.
Right. And when he looked at the Jordan Valley, he didn't see sin. He saw irrigation. He saw economic security. He saw a future.
He saw a thriving portfolio, a place to grow his assets.
Exactly. The source notes that the cities of the plain Sodom, Gomorrah, Admah, Zeboim, and Zoar were likely fortified city-states. This wasn't just a collection of tents. This was a civilization. It was known as the Pentapolis.
So 5 cities working together.
A coalition, yes. And they controlled lucrative trade routes connecting Egypt all the way to Mesopotamia. This was a center of commerce. This was sophistication.
So compared to where Abraham was living.
Abraham was up in the rugged hill country of Canaan. It was rougher, it was less developed, it relied on seasonal rains, which are unpredictable.
It required more faith to live there.
Absolutely. Sodom represented the good life. It offered integration into a sophisticated society. It offered walls, markets, culture, predictability. And that allure, that pull toward stability and comfort, is something that resonates with every single one of us.
It's the modern dream, really. Move to the place with the best economy, the best amenities, the best schools, the place where things are happening.
But there was a catch, wasn't there? It wasn't just a garden. It was a battlefield.
And this is the layer that is so often missed in, the Sunday school tellings of the story. The geopolitical danger.
Yes, the essay highlights that this region was politically volatile. It was a powder keg.
Right, the War of the Kings. We usually skip this chapter, Genesis 14, because the names are hard to pronounce, but it seems critical to understanding Lot's situation.
It is absolutely critical. Genesis 14 records this massive regional conflict. You had the 5 cities of the plain, including Sodom, but they weren't independent. They were a vassal state.
Meaning they served a higher power.
Yes, they were subject to a guy named Chedorlaomer.
Which is a great name, by the way. Terrifying, but great. Who was he?
He was an Elamite king. Elam was in modern-day Iran, so he was a Mesopotamian powerhouse, basically the superpower of the day.
So Sodom was paying taxes to this foreign king.
They were. For 12 years, Sodom and its neighbors served him. They paid tribute. But the text tells us in the 13th year, they rebelled.
So when Lot moves there, he isn't moving into a peaceful vacuum.
No. He is moving into a vassal state that is actively plotting a revolution against a superpower. He looks at the green grass, he looks at the city walls, but he fails to look at the political map.
He moved into a war zone.
He did. He was so focused on the economic opportunity that he was blind to the political instability.
That is such a critical insight. He traded the protection of Abraham's altar, which was a nomadic life, yes, but it was covered by God's promise.
Covered by God's presence.
For the precarious security of Sodom's gate.
Precisely. Long before the fire of judgment fell from heaven, the fires of war were already burning on earth there.
It really speaks to how our desire for security can actually lead us into greater danger because we judge by sight, not by spiritual reality.
We mistake walls for safety. We mistake wealth for well-being. Lot made that fundamental error.
And then, of course, there is the culture itself. We can't talk about Sodom without talking about the moral landscape, because while it looked like Eden, it apparently acted like hell.
It was notoriously wicked. And again, we need to be specific here. The Bible says the outcry against the city was so great that it reached God's ears.
An outcry suggests victims. It suggests injustice.
Yes. This isn't just about private sin. This is about a society characterized by violence, oppression, arrogance, and yes, sexual perversion. Ezekiel 16 gives a whole list. It was a complete societal breakdown.
And the essay we're drawing from mentions specifically the violation of hospitality. Why is that so significant?
Because in the ancient Near East, hospitality was a sacred duty. It was the bedrock of social interaction, especially in a world without hotels and police forces.
You had to be able to trust strangers.
You had to. The code was that you protect the stranger, the traveler, with your life. Sodom is depicted as a place where the stranger is not protected, but predated upon. The aggression against guests, which we'll see later, highlights a level of depravity that is hard for us to even comprehend.
It's the complete inversion of a fundamental moral law.
It signifies a society that has lost all fear of God and all respect for humanity. They've become a law unto themselves.
And Lot, he wasn't just a tourist observing this from a distance, he became part of it.
No. And this is the deep tragedy. He attempted to integrate. Later in this story, in Genesis 19, where do we find him?
Sitting in the city gate.
And the city gate wasn't just a place to hang out or people watch.
It was the town square, the courthouse, the city hall, all rolled into one.
Exactly. It was the place of civic administration and commerce. If you sat in the gate, you were a man of status, you were an elder, you were a judge, you were part of the establishment.
So he didn't just move into the neighborhood, he ran for city council.
That's a great way to put it. He tried to be a leader, in a system that was fundamentally opposed to God.
He tried to have it both ways. He wanted to be a worshiper of Yahweh, but he also wanted to be a respected citizen of Sodom.
And as we will see, that is a spiritual impossibility. You cannot hold court in a city that God has already condemned. It will warp you from the inside out.
So let's walk through the narrative then. Let's see how he got there. Because he didn't start in the gate. He started in a tent next to his uncle. This is part one of the story, the separation.
Genesis 13. And the catalyst is, ironically, blessing. It's wealth.
The land could not support them. I've always found that line so interesting.
It's a problem of abundance. Their possessions were too great. You have Abraham's herdsmen and Lot's herdsmen getting into fistfights over grazing rights and water.
So their success was actually creating division.
Yes, success brought strife, which is a profound lesson right there. Sometimes the greatest tests of our character come not in poverty, but in prosperity.
And Abraham, being the older one, the patriarch, he has every right to dictate the terms. He could have said, Lot, you raised by me. I have the promise from God. You take the hills. I'm taking the river. I'm the senior partner here.
He could have. It would have been his right, but he doesn't. And this is where you see the first major contrast between the two men. Abraham acts with incredible magnanimity.
He acts with faith.
Total faith. He says, let there be no strife between us. You choose. If you go left, I'll go right. If you go right, I'll go left.
He's basically saying the land doesn't define my blessing. God does.
Exactly. He trusts God to provide regardless of the real estate. He knows his blessing isn't in the soil, it's in the sovereign. He's walking by faith.
And Lot uses his eyes.
Lot walked by sight. The text is very clear. It says he lifted up his eyes, he surveyed the land, he saw the plain, he saw the potential for profit, and he chose for himself.
And he took the best for himself.
He did. He left the scraps, the harder land, for the man who raised him, the man who was his spiritual father. It was a selfish choice, born out of a worldly perspective.
And here begins the drift. The essay we're using traces this progression, and it's chilling how subtle it is at first.
It is never a leap. It's always a drift. It's a slow, almost imperceptible slide.
So what's the first step?
First, Lot chose the plain. That's a geographical choice. It's a business decision.
Okay. Seems innocent enough on the surface.
Then the text says he pitched his tents near Sodom. Some translations say toward Sodom. The Hebrew implies a directionality.
So he's not in the city. He's just adjacent. Close enough to trade, maybe. Close enough to use the amenities.
Close enough to be influenced. He's still living in a tent, which is the symbol of a sojourner, a pilgrim. But his tent flap is facing the city of destruction.
He's looking at it. He's
Okay.
oriented toward it.
Right, he's adjacent to the sin, but not yet fully in it. But that proximity is dangerous. Eventually, by the time we get to the crisis in Genesis 19, he has moved into the city.
He's traded the tent for a house.
They have walls now. He has a permanent address. He has put down roots in the very place he should have fled from.
So it's a progression.
It's a three-step slide. He looked, then he leaned, then he lived. And that is so often how compromise works in our own lives.
But God didn't let him go without a warning. And this leads us to part 2 of the narrative. The warning ignored. This is Genesis 14, that war we mentioned earlier.
This is the wake-up call that went to voicemail.
I like that.
The 4 kings of the east, Chedorlaomer and his allies, they finally come to put down the rebellion. They invade. They sweep through the valley. They crush the kings of Sodom and Gomorrah.
And what happens to Lot?
He gets swept up in it. He is taken captive.
Kidnapped.
He's a prisoner of war. And the text says they took all his goods too. He loses everything, his wealth, his family, his freedom.
No, imagine being Lot in that moment. You moved here for security. You moved here for the good life. You chose the walls and the markets.
And now you are being marched off to Mesopotamia in chains.
The illusion is completely shattered. The walls of Sodom didn't protect him. His status at the gate, if he had any, it didn't protect him. The whole system failed him.
Utterly. And then the rescue. Abraham, the uncle he left behind in the dusty hills, hears about it.
And what does he do?
He takes 318 trained men from his own household, which tells you Abraham wasn't exactly a poor shepherd himself.
He had a pregnant army.
He had a militia, yes.
Yeah.
And he chases down an imperial army. He attacks them by night.
Which is just, it's a miracle in itself. It's a shepherd defeating a superpower.
It's incredible. It's like a clear act of God's power working through Abraham. And he rescues Lot. He brings him back, along with all his goods and his people.
So this is Lot's chance. This is his moment of clarity.
It should have been. And here is the key analysis from our source. And this is the question every listener needs to grapple with. Why didn't this change Lot's mind?
Yeah. I mean, if I'm Lot, I'm thinking, okay, that was a mistake, a huge mistake. Sodom failed me. Abraham's God saved me. I'm going back to the tents. I'm going back to the altar. I'm done with this.
That would be the logical, spiritual response. Repentance. Acknowledging that the choice was wrong and turning back. But he doesn't.
He returns to Sodom.
He goes right back to the scene of the crime.
That's the part that is so hard to understand. Why?
The pull of the world must have been that strong. The entanglement. Perhaps it was pride. He didn't want to admit he was wrong. Perhaps his wife and family were pressuring him. We have a house here. Our friends are here.
He was in too deep.
He was. And notice the stark contrast in Genesis 14. After the battle, the king of Sodom comes out to meet Abraham. He offers him the spoils of war. He says, give me the people, you keep the goods.
Basically, let's make a deal.
And what does Abraham say? I have lifted my hand to the Lord, that I would not take a thread or a sandal strap from you, lest you should say, I have made Abraham rich.
Abraham wants nothing to do with Sodom's wealth. He treats it as spiritually radioactive.
Nothing. He maintains his separation, his integrity. But Lot just slides right back in. He was delivered by Abraham's sword, but he refused to separate from Sodom's sin.
That's a hardening of the heart.
It is. It suggests he was so entangled, so addicted to the lifestyle, that even a near-death experience couldn't shake him loose.
It's like he doubled down. He decided to rebuild in the blast zone.
A perfect analogy. And that decision, that failure to heed the warning, leads us inevitably to perform. Part 3. The Judgment. Genesis 19.
This is the part of the story everyone knows, but the details they are difficult, they are grim.
They are. The chapter opens. 2 angels arrive in Sodom in the evening, and there's Lot sitting in the gate.
So he's not just a resident now, he's an official.
He's fully integrated. He has achieved the status he likely craved.
But he still has enough spiritual sensitivity to recognize that these aren't normal men.
He does. He sees them, and he immediately gets up and bows down. He recognizes that these visitors are special, perhaps divine. He insists on hospitality.
He knows the danger.
He knows the danger of the streets at night. He begs them, turn aside to your servant's house. He brings them into his home. He bakes unleavened bread. There is still a flicker of the old Abrahamic faith there. He's trusted to do the right thing.
And then the mob arrives.
Before they lay down, the men of the city, the men of Sodom, both young and old, all the people to the last man, surrounded the house.
All the people to the last man. That phrase is terrifying. It wasn't a fringe group. It wasn't a gang of thugs.
That was the entire male population. It's a picture of total corporate depravity. They surround the house. They demand the visitors for the purpose of sexual assault.
And here we see the depth of Lot's degradation. The moment that makes everyone's stomach turn.
The offer he makes. It's the hardest verse in the story to read.
It is.
He goes out to face the mob, shuts the door behind him to protect his guests, and he says, I beg you, my brothers, do not act so wickedly. Behold, I have 2 daughters who have not known any man. Let me bring them out to you and do to them as you please.
I think every parent listening to that just recoils. It's repulsive. It feels impossible that a righteous man could do that.
It is repulsive. And the essay we're using doesn't sugarcoat it. It explains that this shows how a righteous man's moral compass can be completely warped by prolonged exposure to a depraved culture.
So he was trying to do the right thing, upholding the code of hospitality by protecting his guests.
But he did it in a way that was completely twisted and evil. He had absorbed the cultural value that women were expendable property. Or perhaps he was just so desperate and panic-stricken that he lost his mind.
He was trying to negotiate with evil using the currency of evil.
He thought he could bargain with a shark.
Yeah.
And of course, they don't care about his offer. They mock him. This fellow came to sojourn, and he has become the judge. Now we will deal worse with you than with them.
They turn on him.
Immediately. And they press hard against him and try to break down the door.
And thankfully, the angels intervene. They don't let that happen.
They pull Lot back inside. They strike the mob with blindness. And then they drop the hammer. We are going to destroy this place.
Get out.
The outcry against its people has become so great before the Lord, and the Lord has sent us to destroy it.
It's over. The verdict is in.
And they ask him, do you have anyone else here? Sons-in-law, sons, daughters, whoever you have in the city, bring them out.
And this brings us to part 4, and honestly, the word that haunts me in this whole story, it's the most convicting part for me. The hesitation.
The text says, he lingered.
The angels say fire is coming. The mob is blind and raging outside. The divine command has been given, and Lot lingers.
The Hebrew word implies a reluctance, a delaying, a hesitation. He's dragging his feet.
Why? That is the million-dollar question. The building is on fire and he's checking his email. Why?
Because his heart was there. His wealth was there. His social standing was there. All his investments were in Sodom. Even though he was vexed by the sin, as Peter says, he was deeply entangled by the lifestyle.
He couldn't imagine life without Sodom.
It was all he had built for himself. Leaving meant losing everything he had worked for. It meant admitting his entire life's direction had been a mistake.
So he was stuck. He was paralyzed by his attachment to the world.
He was so stuck that the angels had to use physical force. This part is amazing. The text says, as dawn was breaking, the angels urged him. But as he lingered, the men seized him and his wife and his 2 daughters by the hand, the Lord being merciful to him.
They had to drag him out.
They physically grabbed him and hauled him out of the city.
That is a violent grace.
It is. It's a grace that doesn't wait for your permission. If they hadn't dragged him, he would have burned. He was paralyzed. It wasn't his feet that were stuck. It was his will.
And even then, even while being dragged, once they get outside the city, he starts bargaining.
It's almost pathetic, really. The angel says, flee to the mountains. Don't look back. Don't stop anywhere in the plain.
A clear command. Get to high ground. Separate yourself completely.
And Lot says, oh no, my lord. Behold, your servant has found favor in your sight. But I cannot escape to the mountains, lest some disaster overtake me and I die.
He's afraid of the mountains, the very place of safety.
He's afraid of the rugged isolation of the mountains, the very place Abraham thrived. He still clung to the idea of urban security, even as the urban landscape was being erased.
So what does he ask for?
He says, look at this little city over here, Zoar. It's just a small one. Let me go there. He bargained for a little bit of Sodom.
He's still negotiating, still trying to control the terms of his own rescue.
Unbelievable, isn't it? And God, in his mercy, grants it. Zoar was one of the 5 cities scheduled for destruction, but God spared it just for Lot.
And then the tragedy hits its peak. Part 5. The aftermath. They are running. The sun has risen. The sulfur and fire are falling from the sky. And his wife.
She looks back.
It wasn't just curiosity, was it? The source essay is clear on this. It wasn't just a glance over her shoulder.
No. The grammar implies a lingering gaze, a longing, a desire. She was physically leaving, but her heart remained in Sodom. She couldn't let go of the life she had built, her friends, her home.
She was being saved, but she didn't want to be.
And she becomes a pillar of salt.
A monument to a divided heart. A permanent warning.
A terrifying warning. And Jesus himself brings it up later in the Gospel of Luke. He just says, remember Lot's wife. That's the whole sermon.
Don't be almost saved. Don't be half-hearted. Don't be dragged out while your heart stays behind.
Exactly. And Lot ends up exactly where he feared he would.
In the mountains.
After all that bargaining, he was afraid to stay in Zoar, probably realizing it was too close to the destruction and the fallout. So he leaves the city he begged for and ends up in a cave in the mountains, living like a refugee.
The irony is just brutal. He chose the city for prosperity and security, and he ends up hiding in a hole in the ground.
And the legacy. It gets even darker. His daughters, who have now been raised in the moral vacuum of Sodom, think the whole world is ended.
They think they're the last people on earth.
Yes. So they devise a plan to preserve their father's line through incest. A plan that would be unthinkable to someone raised at Abraham's altar.
They get him drunk on 2 consecutive nights.
Yes. And from that horrific union come the Moabites and the Ammonites.
2 nations that would become perpetual, bitter enemies of Israel, God's chosen people.
The tragedy is complete. He sought security, but he left a legacy of war. He sought a name for himself in the gate of the city, and he ended up hiding in a cave, fathering enemies of God's people.
Okay, we need to take a breath there, because that is just heavy. It is a grim, grim narrative. It's a horror story, really.
It is. It's meant to be. It's a cautionary tale of the highest order.
But we have to go back to that intro. We have to circle back to Peter, because after all of that, the selfish choice, the compromise, the cowardice, the hesitation, the failure of leadership, the incest, Peter calls him righteous Lot.
Let's unpack the theology here, because this is the lifeline for the listener who feels a little too much like Lot today. This is where the grace comes in.
How does that label stick? How can God look at that wreck of a life and say, righteous?
It comes down to a crucial theological distinction that the source essay explains very well. It's the difference between standing and state, or you could say position versus practice.
Okay, explain that difference. It sounds important.
It's foundational to our faith. Our standing or position before God is our legal status. Justification, being declared righteous by God, is a gift received by faith alone. It is not based on our behavior.
So this is about how God sees us because of Christ.
Exactly. Genesis doesn't explicitly record Lot's moment of faith, but it implies it. He traveled with Abraham. He worshiped the true God Yahweh. He was part of the covenant family. In God's courtroom, because of his faith, Lot was declared righteous.
So his ticket to heaven, so to speak, was punched. He was in the family. His eternal destination was secure.
Yes. His legal standing before God was righteous. He was a believer. But his state, his actual day-to-day condition, his daily life, his sanctification was a disaster.
So his practice didn't match his position.
Not even close. The essay uses the term the carnal believer. It's a biblical category for a person who is genuinely saved, but whose life is entangled with and dominated by the world, the flesh.
And the Apostle Paul talks about this in 1 Corinthians 3, doesn't he?
He does. It's the perfect illustration. He describes believers who build their lives on the one foundation, which is Jesus Christ. But he says you can build on that foundation with two different kinds of materials.
Gold, silver, precious stones, or wood, hay, and stubble.
Exactly. The gold, silver, and precious stones represent a life of obedience, faith, and eternal value. The wood, hay, and stubble represent worldly works, compromised living, selfish ambition, things that have no eternal value.
And Paul says a day is coming when fire will test the quality of each person's work.
Yes. The fire of God's judgment. The gold and silver will be refined, but the wood, hay, and stubble will be consumed. It will all burn up.
And what about the person who built with those workless materials?
Paul says of that person, if it is burned up, the builder will suffer loss, but yet will be saved, even though only as one escaping through the flames.
That is Lot. That is a perfect one-sentenced biography of Lot.
It is. He lost his reward, he lost his legacy, he lost his witness, he lost his family. He suffered immense loss. But he kept his soul. He was saved as through fire.
It's a comforting doctrine in one sense, that God's grace is greater than our mess and our salvation doesn't depend on our performance.
It is deeply comforting.
But it's also terrifying.
It is a sobering doctrine. It means you can be saved and yet completely waste your life. You can go to heaven, but arrive smelling of smoke, with nothing to show for your time on earth. You can be a righteous failure.
That really connects to this idea in the essay of Sodom as a type of judgment. Jesus brings this up himself in Luke 17.
He does. He says, the days of the Son of Man, his second coming, will be like the days of Lot. And listen to what he highlights. People were eating, drinking, buying, selling, planting, building.
Notice what he doesn't say. He doesn't list all the gross sins. He doesn't say they were committing violence and having orgies. He says they were doing business as usual.
Normal life. They were completely absorbed in the here and now. They were oblivious to the coming judgment. And then judgment fell instantly and destroyed them all.
The warning is that the end will come when the world least expects it, when everyone is just going about their daily lives.
Exactly. And the flip side of that, which Peter points out in 2 Peter 2:9, is that the Lord knows how to rescue the godly from trials. Lot is the prime example. God can pull his people out at the last second, but the rescue can be terrifyingly close, and you might lose everything in the process.
There is also this point about the failure of witness. I think this is one of the saddest, most convicting details in the entire text.
Genesis 19.14. It's heartbreaking. When the angels tell Lot to get his family out, Lot goes to his sons-in-law. These are men pledged to marry his daughters, likely local men of Sodom.
He gives them the warning.
He says, "Up, get out of this place, for the Lord is about to destroy the city." He's delivering a direct message from God.
And their reaction.
But he seemed to his sons-in-law to be joking.
They thought it was a prank. They laughed in his face.
They laughed at him. Why? Because nothing in Lot's life, up to that point, had suggested that he took God's judgment seriously. He lived like them. He talked like them. He sat in their gate. He prioritized what they prioritized.
So when he suddenly started talking about divine judgment, his words had no weight.
His life contradicted his message. His warning had no credibility. The essay puts it this way. Truth must be backed by a transformed life to be credible.
Wow.
You can't preach separation when you're fully integrated. You can't warn people about a fire when you're busy decorating your house in the burning zone. They will think you're joking.
And contrast that with Abraham. Abraham was far away on the heights of Hebron.
Abraham was separate, and because he was separate, he had power with God. His intercession in Genesis 18 when he prayed, "Will you sweep away the righteous with the wicked?" That prayer actually set the stage for Lot's rescue.
Abraham's separation gave him spiritual authority.
And Lot's compromise stripped him of his voice. He couldn't even convince his own family that the danger was real.
That is a powerful takeaway. We often think, oh, I need to be in the culture to reach the culture. I need to watch what they watch and go where they go.
And there's a truth to that.
Hmm.
We must be in the world. But Lot was of the world. He lost his distinctiveness. And when you lose your distinctiveness, you lose your influence. Salt that loses its saltiness is good for nothing but to be thrown out.
But even in all this failure, there is that one shining light we touched on, the sovereign grace.
The dragging.
Yeah. I want to linger on that image as we move toward application.
It's the theological anchor of the entire story. Lot's salvation was not due to his obedience. He lingered. It wasn't due to his swiftness or his courage. It wasn't due to his negotiation skills.
It was entirely due to God's mercy.
The text says it explicitly, the Lord being merciful to him. And Genesis 19.29 adds another layer. It says, when God destroyed the cities, God remembered Abraham and sent Lot out of the midst of the overthrow.
So it was God's mercy, and it was God's faithfulness to his covenant with Abraham.
It's a picture of our security resting entirely on God's grip on us, not our grip on him.
If it depended on Lot's grip, he would have let go and grabbed a bag of gold or his wife's hand as she looked back.
Or he would have just frozen in fear and indecision. But God's grip is stronger than our hesitation. God's grace is stronger than our compromise. That is the comfort in this dark story. We are not saved by our ability to run. We are saved by his ability to rescue.
So what does this mean for us? Let's pivot to application. Because most of us aren't herding sheep in the Jordan Valley, and hopefully we aren't fleeing a rain of fire today, but we are making decisions every day.
The first lesson is clearly about decision-making. It's that core theme of walking by sight versus walking by faith.
The glitter isn't gold principle.
Exactly. We face this constantly. A job offer comes in. It pays 50% more. It's the career jump you've always wanted. But it requires moving your family to a city where you have no community, no solid church, and the culture is actively hostile to your values.
Or maybe the job itself requires you to compromise your ethics, to cut corners, to be dishonest.
Or requires working 80 hours a week so you never see your kids and you're too exhausted for prayer or fellowship.
Lot looked at the financials. He looked at the bottom line. He didn't look at the spirituals.
He asked, will this make me rich? Instead of, will this bring me closer to God? Will this help my family flourish spiritually?
And the essay warns that what looks like the garden of the Lord can be a gateway to hell.
We have to look past the surface. We have to do our spiritual due diligence. We have to ask about the spiritual atmosphere of the places we put ourselves and our families. Is this an environment where my faith will thrive or merely survive or, God forbid, die?
Then there is the danger of lingering. I think this one really hits home for a lot of people, that feeling of being stuck.
It's spiritual inertia. It's the state of knowing what is right but being unable to do it. It's a disconnect between conviction and action.
I know I should stop this habit. I know I should end this unhealthy relationship. I know I should leave this toxic work environment, but I just sit there. I stay in the gig.
You rationalize. I can handle it. It's not that bad. I'll leave tomorrow. I can be a good influence here. I can change them.
But the command in the New Testament is never negotiate with sin.
No. It is flee. Flee sexual immorality. Flee idolatry. Flee the love of money. You don't linger with a viper, you run. Lot tried to manage his environment instead of escaping it. And if you are lingering today in a place or a pattern you know is destructive, you need to hear the urgency in the angels' voices.
And for the listener who feels stuck right now, what is the word for them from this story?
The word is that the window of opportunity doesn't stay open forever. The fire fell. There is a time where God says, enough. Obedience needs to be immediate. Delayed obedience is disobedience. If God is saying go, you go now, don't linger.
Then we have the divided heart, Lot's wife.
Such a powerful and tragic figure. Jesus said, remember Lot's wife. That is one of the shortest, most terrifying sermons ever preached.
She's the prototype of the almost Christian, the person who looks the part but whose heart is elsewhere.
She was on the path to salvation. Physically, she was out of the city. She was holding the angel's hand. But her heart wasn't out. Her treasure was still in Sodom.
You can be in church every Sunday. You can be in a Christian family. You can be dragged along by the faith of your parents or your spouse.
And still perish because you love the world more than you love Christ. It's a profound warning against half-hearted Christianity. You can't put your hand to the plow and look back. You can't serve God and mammon. You have to choose.
Finally, the application about our environment. The problem of desensitization.
The corrosive power of culture. This is so relevant for us today. Peter says Lot was tormented day after day by the lawless deeds he saw and heard, yet he stayed.
He felt the torment, but he didn't act on it. And over time, it eroded him. It desensitized him to the point where offering his daughters to a mob seemed like a viable option.
It's the frog in the kettle. The temperature rises so slowly you don't realize you're being boiled alive.
And we are all swimming in a cultural kettle that is getting hotter and hotter.
We are. And we cannot immerse ourselves in godless entertainment, godless values, and godless conversations 24/7 and expect to come out spiritually unscathed. We need insulation. Not total isolation. We aren't called to be monks, but we need distinct boundaries. We need to be intentional about what we allow into our minds and hearts.
Lot had no boundaries. He took the door off his tent and moved into a house with no lock, spiritually speaking.
And the culture flooded in and drowned his family.
So as we wrap this up, it feels like a heavy verdict. It's a tragedy of a wasted life. But it's also, as you said in the beginning, a story of hope in a strange, severe way.
It is. The summary is this. Lot saved his life, but he lost his life's meaning. He is the tragic example. But God is the hero of the story.
God's faithfulness shines through the human weakness.
He answers intercession, he remembered Abraham, and he drags it. He drags the weak to safety. That's the part that should give us all hope.
That's the image I want to leave our listeners with, the dragging.
Me too.
Yeah.
Because we are all Lot sometimes. We all linger.
I want to read the closing scripture from the essay. This is Genesis 19, verses 15 and 16. Just let these words settle over you. With the coming of dawn, the angels urged Lot, saying, "Hurry, take your wife and your 2 daughters who are here, or you will be swept away when the city is punished." When he hesitated, the men grasped his hand and the hands of his wife and of his 2 daughters and led them safely out of the city, for the Lord was merciful to them.
For the Lord was merciful to them, even in the hesitation, even in the lingering. That is the gospel right there.
That is the main encouragement. The Lord is merciful even when we hesitate. He is the one who leads us safely out.
Amen.
I want to end this deep dive with a blessing, as we do with these heavy topics. A blessing for you, the listener, as you navigate your own plains and mountains. May you have the eyes of faith to choose the high ground, even when the valley looks green and easy. May you have the strength to flee when the warning comes, breaking free from the inertia of the world. And above all, may you know the deep assurance of God's merciful grip on your life, that when you are too weak to walk, when you hesitate and linger, He is strong enough to drag you to safety.
Amen.
Thanks for joining us on the Deep Dive. We'll see you next time.